Hey guys, tonight we are tiptoeing back about 3,500 years, not to witness the pomp of a pharaoh's court or decipher cryptic hieroglyphs on a grand temple wall. Oh no, we're diving into something far more intimate, far more fundamental to daily existence. We are going to imagine ourselves as an ordinary, skilled ancient Egyptian artisan. One of those incredible individuals who crafted the very tunes that whisper tales of eternity, and we're going to explore what such a person actually ate for breakfast. Picture the deep, velvety darkness just before the Egyptian dawn, the air carrying a distinct pre-dawn chill, cool and still. You're nestled within a village of artisans, a close-knit community of craftsmen, perhaps near the famed Valley of the Kings, a place like Deir el-Medina. You probably won't survive this ancient Egyptian artisan's diet for long without modern supplements, let alone their demanding workday. It was robustly simple, to say the least, a testament to making the most of what the Nile's bounty and the arid landscape could offer. A diet that fueled the hands that built eternity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly helps the channel continue to bring these little historical drifts to life. And, as always, I love hearing from you. So please feel free to let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The very first sensation that filters into your slowly returning consciousness is the profound coolness. It's a specific quality of chill, the signature of a desert night that has patiently drawn all the accumulated heat from the parched earth, leaving behind a refreshing coolness that now seeps into the very stones and mud bricks of your simple home. This coolness is not aggressive or biting. Rather, it's a gentle, pervasive presence. A welcome contrast to the fiery embrace of the Egyptian sun that you know will inevitably follow in a few short hours. You lie still, suspended in that liminal space between dreaming and wakefulness, feeling this cool air settle on any exposed skin, a silent conversation with the dying night, the coolness almost seeming to possess a texture of its own, fine and smooth against your face. Distinctly different from the dry heat that will later shimmer above the desert sands. You are resting on a woven reed mat, its surface a complex tapestry of slight ridges from the bundled reeds and smoother sections worn down by years of use. A texture that has become as familiar to your body as your own heartbeat. Its slightly coarse feel is a grounding sensation against your back and limbs, a direct connection to the natural materials of your world, harvested from the banks of the life-giving Nile. Or, perhaps, if your family has bartered well or your skills as an artisan have afforded a little more, this mat lies upon a low, simple wooden frame. Such frames were often crafted from precious, scarce timber like local acacia or perhaps the revered sycamore fig, and meticulously strung with taut flaxen cords or perhaps durable strips of treated animal hide, lifting you a hand's breadth or so from the packed earth floor, offering a subtle distinction in comfort and a slight barrier against the deeper chill that sometimes emanates from the ground itself in the desert's coldest hours. Your covering is not a heavy, woolen blanket as one might find in colder climes, but most likely a substantial piece of sturdy linen, a fabric absolutely central to Egyptian life for everything from clothing to sailcloth to sacred mummy wrappings. This linen, through countless nights of use and the rhythmic, vigorous beating it undergoes during washing with natural natron, a cleansing salt, and fresh water, has softened considerably from its original, somewhat stiff crispness imparted by the weaving process. It holds a faint, clean scent, perhaps of the sun if it was dried spread out on warm, clean sand, or the faintest trace of wood smoke if dried near a gentle hearth on a rare damp or overcast day. It's drawn up around you, a light but surprisingly effective barrier against the pre-dawn air. Its natural flaxen fibers breathing with you, contouring to your form. Your home, the sanctuary where you rest, and which contains your small family, is a modest structure, likely comprising one or two multi-purpose rooms. Its design dictated by climate, practicality, and available materials. It's constructed from sun-dried mud bricks, the quintessential building block of ancient Egyptian domestic architecture for millennia. This is a mainstream historical fact that archaeologists confirm with every excavated village across the land. These bricks, formed from the rich, dark silt deposited by the Nile's annual inundation, meticulously mixed by hand or by treading feet with sand for temper and chopped straw or papyrus fibers for binding and tensile strength, were shaped in rectangular wooden molds and left to bake hard under the relentless, desiccating Egyptian sun. Your home, a charming mud brick abode, offers that authentic, one with the earth vibe, which is great until a particularly enthusiastic desert beetle decides to also become one with your sleeping mat. These walls are your primary shield against the elements, their thickness providing a natural form of insulation. The roof above you is flat, a common feature in this predominantly arid climate. Constructed from palm logs or other available wooden beams laid carefully across the tops of the sturdy mud brick walls. These beams are then covered with layers of woven palm fronds, dense bundles of reeds gathered from the riverbank, and finally, a thick, protective coating of mud plaster to seal it against the infrequent but sometimes torrential seasonal rains and the more persistent, baking sun. This flat roof often serves as an additional living or sleeping space, especially during the stifling heat of the summer months when the rising heat within the house can make it far preferable to sleep out under the vast expanse of the star-dusted desert sky, hopefully fanned by any slight night breeze that might stir. The floor beneath your mat is packed earth, beaten and smoothed by years of daily life, by generations of footsteps perhaps. Cool and surprisingly solid to the touch if you were to reach out a hand. As your eyes, still heavy with the remnants of sleep, slowly begin to adjust to the profound glow, the interior of your dwelling remains shrouded in deep, almost palpable shadow. Any light that penetrates is exceedingly faint, perhaps the barest, most ethereal diffusion from the myriad stars or the very first, almost imperceptible, hint of zodiacal light through a small, unglazed aperture high in one wall, less a window designed for affording views of the outside world and more a strategic ventilation opening, sometimes partially covered with a loose weave of matting to deter insects or overly harsh drafts. You might gradually begin to discern the vague, familiar shapes of your few essential possessions. Some burnished redware pottery vessels, tall, narrow water jars, wider-mouthed storage pots for precious grain or cooking oil, standing in a designated corner, their rounded forms softened by the glow. Perhaps a low wooden stool, its surface worn smooth by use, or a simple, unadorned wooden chest where valuable tools or finer linens are carefully stored away from dust and pests. The air within your small home carries a unique and specific blend of domestic scents. The persistent, grounding coolness of the earth itself, the faint, almost mineral tang of the mud plaster on the walls, a lingering trace of castor or sesame oil from the small, fist-sized clay lamp that would have provided a meager, smoky light before your family retired for the night, and perhaps the subtle, almost smoky hint of last night's cooking fire from the simple hearth, if it's located within this main room. Historians still argue whether the average artisan's dwelling, like yours in a specialized village such as Deir el Medina, represented a specific, recognizable social stratum with clearly defined comforts and amenities. Or if comfort itself is such a culturally relative term that we, from our modern vantage point, struggle to apply it accurately or meaningfully across the vast gulf of millennia and differing environmental realities. The debate considers everything from floor space per person to the quality of household goods found. Your head, you'll remember from the moment you laid down hours ago, isn't cradled in a soft, yielding pillow of down or wool, the kind that later cultures would prize. Instead, it rests upon a headrest, typically carved from a single piece of wood, though examples in stone, pottery, or even faience are known. particularly from wealthier or more ceremonial contexts. This rather curious item, a quirky tidbit of ancient Egyptian daily life that often fascinates modern observers, might seem Spartan, even purposefully uncomfortable to our sensibilities. Yours is likely a practical wooden one, perhaps fashioned from acacia or sycamore fig wood, with a gently curved upper surface designed to fit the nape of your neck, providing support and elevation. Beyond simple physical support, these headrests were thought by many to promote good airflow for easy breathing during sleep. To help maintain sometimes elaborate hairstyles, though this was probably less of a daily concern for a working artisan like yourself than for a courtly noble or priestess, and, importantly, to elevate the vulnerable head away from the floor where less welcome nocturnal visitors like scorpions, centipedes, or even small snakes might roam in the darkness. That solid headrest ensures you wake up with your neck perfectly aligned, or at least perfectly aware that you slept on a block of wood. At least it discourages rolling over and hogging the single linen sheet, if there's anyone to hog it from. Some headrests were even inscribed with apotropaic, evil-averting, hieroglyphs or shaped like figures of protective household deities such as Bes, the dwarf god, or Tarit, the hippopotamus goddess, intended to ward off nightmares or malevolent spirits during the vulnerable hours of sleep. So, it's not just a piece of rudimentary furniture, it's a multifunctional tool. An item of personal protective equipment, ancient Egyptian style. The cool, unyielding smoothness of its surface against your neck is a constant, distinct reminder of this unique sleeping custom. A world away from the feather-filled comforts that future generations might take for granted. The silence of this pre-dawn world is profound, a heavy blanket of stillness that allows the smallest, most insignificant sound to gain an almost startling significance, though for now, only your own quiet, rhythmic breath breaks the ancient spell as you lie in the deep, enveloping stillness of your desert home. Your senses, still draped in the soft gauze of sleep, begin to sharpen, not abruptly, but with a gentle, incremental clarity. The coolness you first registered now prompts a more defined awareness of your own body heat beneath the linen covering, a subtle cocoon of warmth in the surrounding chill. It's this delicate interplay, this silent thermal conversation between your skin and the ambient air, that often serves as the initial, almost imperceptible nudge towards wakefulness. There are no gongs sounding from a nearby temple just yet, no village dogs barking with urgent alarm, and certainly no chirping electronic devices from a future you cannot imagine, demanding your immediate and undivided attention with a cascade of notifications. Your awakening is orchestrated by a far more ancient, deeply ingrained, and infinitely more reliable mechanism. Your body's internal clock, a marvel of biological engineering meticulously calibrated by a lifetime lived in profound and unbroken rhythm with the sun, the moon, and the subtle shifts of the seasons. This internal chronometer, a precious legacy passed down through countless generations who rose with the first faint promise of light and rested when darkness reclaimed the land, instinctively knows the precise moment when the deepest, most inert part of the night is past. It understands, with a wisdom that requires no conscious thought, that the cycle of profound rest is nearing its natural conclusion and the cycle of activity, of life and labor, must soon begin, even before the sun itself has made any dramatic, fiery announcement over the distant eastern cliffs. Your physiology has begun its subtle, preparatory shift. Minute changes in hormones begin to circulate. A fractional, almost immeasurable rise in your core body temperature occurs. These are the silent, internal signals that initiate your graceful return to the waking world. It's a process far more attuned to your natural state, far more harmonious and less jarring than any man-made alarm could ever hope to be. Your eyelids flutter, a delicate movement, like the wings of a moth. There's no hitting a snooze button. That particular, often cherished, delight won't be invented for another 3 millennia, give or take a few centuries. Your only option is get up, or get up slightly later and face the consequences, perhaps a disgruntled foreman, or a cooler, less appetizing portion of the morning's simple breakfast. You might stretch, a slow, luxurious extension of your limbs within the confines of your sleeping space, your toes pointing, your fingers reaching, a pleasant, easing pull in your muscles. A satisfying loosening of joints that have been held relatively still for many hours through the night. You feel the slight, familiar resistance of the woven reed mat beneath you. Its intricate pattern perhaps subtly impressed upon the skin of your back or side. The linen sheet, your primary covering, rustles softly as you move, a small, intimate sound in the prevailing, almost sacred quiet of the pre-dawn. Your brain, still in its early startup phase, think of it as Papyrus OS slowly loading its essential programs, begins to register the almost imperceptible shift from sleep mode to pending activity. Key functions like conscious blinking and the capacity for minor, internal grumbling about the cold floor are gradually coming online. The day, unlike its often chaotic modern counterpart, doesn't crash in on you with an overwhelming to-do list of urgent emails and social media alerts. Rather, it unfurls with a deliberate, unhurried grace, allowing your mind to gently catch up with your stirring senses. Your first fully conscious thoughts are unlikely to be of existential dread or the complex, multi-layered anxieties of a hyper-connected, information-saturated world. They are more elemental, more deeply rooted in the immediate, tangible realities of your existence, perhaps a fleeting, vivid image from a dream surfaces. The ancient Egyptians were keen observers of dreams, a well-established historical fact, believing them to be potential divine messages, omens from the gods, or indicators of future events. There were even specialized priests and wise individuals who practiced dream interpretation, compiling texts of common dream symbols and their supposed meanings. You might briefly ponder a peculiar or vivid dream image. Perhaps you were effortlessly flying over the vast, glittering expanse of the Nile on the back of a giant, iridescent scarab beetle. Or maybe your chisels and mallets had transformed into loaves of sweet honey cake. Standard stuff, really. You make a silent, internal mental note to mostly ignore it unless it involves specific instructions from a recognizable deity or clear directions to a hidden cache of particularly fine turquoise. More likely, though, your mind turns almost immediately towards the practicalities, the distinct feel of the air on your skin, the quiet awareness of your family sleeping soundly nearby, the nascent, dawning understanding that the period of deepest rest is now definitively concluding. The ancient Egyptians, as another mainstream historical fact, meticulously divided their day and their night into a set number of hours, typically 12 for the period of daylight and 12 for the hours of darkness. However, the actual length of these hours was not fixed like our modern 60-minute units. Instead, they would vary depending on the season, with daylight hours being longer in the summer and shorter in the winter. Their entire societal structure, from the precise timing of agricultural cycles like planting and harvesting, to the complex and often daily religious observances in the great temples, and of course, the timing of work on monumental state projects like the pyramids or the royal tombs you yourself contribute to, was intrinsically and inextricably linked to the sun's majestic journey across the sky. This profound solar attunement, this deep respect for and reliance upon the rhythms of the cosmos, is woven into the very fabric of your being. You don't necessarily need to see the sun to know its approximate position relative to the eastern horizon. Your body, through long habit and an almost cellular memory, feels its impending arrival. The thought of the day's tasks doesn't so much arrive with a jolt as it does seep in, like fine desert sand finding its way under a tightly shut door. It's not an unwelcome shock, more gradual. Resigned acceptance of the inevitable. There are intricate hieroglyphs to carve with painstaking precision, or vibrant scenes of the afterlife to paint. And they most certainly won't complete themselves, unless perhaps a particularly ambitious and artistically inclined gang of local scorpions has recently learned the ancient trade. A quirky tidbit often found in discussions of ancient Egyptian daily life is their elaborate system of lucky and unlucky days, derived from mythological events and astrological observations, which were recorded in papyrus calendars. Certain days were deemed auspicious for starting new ventures, while others were considered fraught with peril and specific activities might be avoided. You might take a deep breath now, tasting the quality of the pre-dawn air, a silent, personal augury for the day ahead. Is it heavy with the promise of dust from a brewing Khamsin wind? Or does it feel unusually light and clear, hinting at a rare desert freshness? This intuitive reading of the morning might subtly color your initial mood. Historians still argue about the perceived pace of ancient Egyptian life. Was it a relentless, unceasing grind dictated purely by the harsh necessities of survival in a challenging environment? Or did these deeply ingrained natural rhythms, this rising and resting with the sun, actually allow for more frequent, albeit unrecorded, moments of quiet contemplation, personal reflection, and a profound, almost spiritual connection to the natural world, moments that our own often frantic, artificially lit modern life has perhaps inadvertently erased or devalued? The necessity of an early start is an unspoken but absolute truth of your existence as a working artisan. The cool hours of the early morning are precious, a golden window for any kind of sustained physical exertion before the sun climbs high and asserts its full, often brutal, thermal dominance over the landscape. Moreover, the essential tasks that must precede the actual workday, the fetching of water from the distant well or cistern, the careful preparation and rekindling of the vital cooking fire, the laborious grinding of grain for the daily bread, and the baking itself, all require significant time and focused effort. Every minute of usable daylight, especially these cooler, more forgiving portions at the beginning and end of the sun's arc, is a valuable resource to be managed with inherent wisdom and without waste. So, as your internal clock fully rouses you from the last vestiges of slumber, there's an ingrained sense of purpose already stirring within you, a quiet, unforced readiness to engage with the familiar sequence of activities that will ultimately lead you, fed and prepared, out of the sanctuary of your dwelling and towards your designated place of work in the service of both God and King. The deep darkness still holds sway in the corners of your home, but your day, in these quiet, slowly coalescing internal moments, has most assuredly and irrevocably begun. With the cloak of deepest sleep now fully cast aside, and your mind gently aligning itself with the impending demands and routines of the new day, your body signals its readiness for the first physical acts of waking. You push aside the softened linen covering, the cool pre-dawn air of your mud brick dwelling immediately kissing your skin, a sensation that is both startlingly fresh and deeply familiar. You swing your legs over the side of your woven reed mat, or perhaps the simple wooden frame if that's your bed, your bare feet meeting the cool, surprisingly smooth embrace of the packed earth floor. It's nature's way of saying, good morning. And yes, it's still rather chilly down here. There's a moment of slight stiffness in your limbs, perhaps. A gentle reminder of yesterday's labors or the hours spent in repose, but it eases quickly as you sit up, the world tilting back to its familiar upright orientation. Your first destination within the still dim confines of your home is the area designated for morning ablutions. This isn't a separate, tiled room with gleaming fixtures, of course. In most artisan homes, this would be a specific corner of the main living space, or perhaps a slightly more private alcove if the dwelling is a little larger. Sometimes even a designated spot just outside the doorway in a small, walled courtyard, weather permitting. Privacy during these moments is, shall we say, a more communal concept than you might be used to, especially if your household is bustling with several family members. Think less in-suite spa, and more everyone politely looks the other way mostly. Here, a large, wide-mouthed pottery basin rests, perhaps on a low, rough-hewn wooden stand to bring it to a more convenient height, or simply placed directly on the floor, beside it. An earthenware ewer or a lidded water jar holds the water fetched the previous evening, kept as clean as possible from the ubiquitous desert dust. You reach for a dipper, a smaller pottery cup, or perhaps a dried gourd with a handle fashioned, and ladle some of this stored water into the basin. It's cool, having sat through the night, and its surface in the dim light might reflect the faint, grayish luminescence filtering in from the high ventilation slit or the doorway. The first splash of this water on your face is a potent awakener, chasing away the last vestiges of sleepiness more effectively than any shouted command. You cup the water in your hands, bringing it to your face, rubbing your eyes, your cheeks, your forehead. The sensation is sharp, clean, and invigorating. You might use only water, or perhaps you have a small quantity of natron. Natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate harvested from dry lake beds like the Wadi El Natron, is a mainstream historical fact of Egyptian hygiene. Used not just in the complex rituals of mummification, but also as a daily cleansing agent, akin to a primitive soap. If you use natron, you might crumble a small, chalky piece into your wet hands, working it into a slightly gritty, alkaline paste that helps to cut through any oil or grime from the night. It doesn't lather like modern soaps, but it has a distinct, slightly salty and purifying feel. After washing your face and hands, perhaps your arms as well, you'll certainly rinse your mouth. You take a mouthful of the cool water from the dipper, swishing it vigorously to freshen your breath and remove any stale taste from sleep. Next comes the ancient Egyptian equivalent of brushing your teeth, perhaps a nice chewy stick. A frayed twig from a particular plant like the licorice root or salvador persica, the fibers of which act as a natural abrasive cleaner for the teeth and gums. Or you might use your finger, perhaps dipped in a little natron, to rub your teeth. Minty freshness was probably still under development by the royal chemists, but it certainly beats dragon breath when greeting your coworkers or family. It's a quirky tidbit that despite these efforts, the diet of ancient Egyptians, particularly the bread which often contained fine sand from the grinding stones, led to significant dental wear, a common finding in mummified remains. So, while you're making an effort, the daily grind, quite literally, takes its toll. Having refreshed your face and mouth, you would then attend to other bodily needs. This part of the routine is, naturally, handled with as much discretion as your living situation allows. Your home might possess a simple toilet facility, perhaps a wooden or pottery seat positioned over a removable container filled with sand or earth, which would be emptied regularly outside the village or into designated refuse pits. Alternatively, one might use a designated private spot in an outdoor area if your dwelling configuration permits. The focus is on practicality and hygiene within the available means, a brief, functional visit to attend to nature's more pressing calls before the day truly gets underway. Once these essential personal tasks are complete, you would dry yourself with a piece of linen cloth. Like your bedding, this towel is unlikely to be soft and fluffy in the modern sense, but rather a length of sturdy, absorbent linen, perhaps a little rough to the touch, but effective at its job. The feeling of the slightly coarse fabric against your skin is another part of the sensory landscape of your morning, another signal of transition from the passivity of sleep to the activity of the day. Historians still argue whether the use of scented oils or fragrant herbs, such as myrrh or frankincense, was commonly incorporated into the daily ablutions and personal grooming of the artisan class to perfume the skin or anoint the hair, or if such refinements were predominantly luxuries reserved for the wealthier elite, temple rituals, or special festive occasions. For your typical morning, clean water and perhaps natron likely form the core of your hygiene practice. These rituals are performed with an economy of movement, a practiced efficiency born of daily repetition. There's no lingering in a steam-filled bathroom, no idle contemplation of your reflection in a large, perfectly silvered mirror. If you possess a mirror, it's likely a small, precious disc of highly polished bronze or copper, offering a somewhat dim, perhaps slightly distorted, yellowish likeness. enough to ensure your face is clean and presentable, but not an object for prolonged vanity. The entire process of these initial ablutions is relatively brief. A functional and necessary series of actions to prepare you physically and mentally for the day. The cool water has sharpened your senses. The simple acts of cleansing have refreshed your body. And you now stand ready for the next sequence of morning activities that will lead towards the breaking of your fast. The household around you may still be mostly quiet, but you, at least, are now fully present in the emerging day, having completed your own initial ablutions. Feeling a measure of alertness now coursing through you from the cool water and the conscious engagement with the dawn of a new day. You move with quiet purpose back into the main space of your dwelling. The air is still imbued with the pre-dawn chill, but the profound silence that greeted your first waking moments is beginning to subtly shift to acquire a new texture. It's no longer just your own breath you hear, or the faint rustle of your own movements. The life force of your household is beginning to stir, almost imperceptibly at first, like the first gentle breezes that often precede the full light of morning. Your wife, who perhaps shares your mat or lies on an adjacent one, may already be stirring, her own internal clock chiming in harmony with yours, or perhaps she responds to the subtle sounds of your own activity. You might gently rouse your spouse if she is still deeply asleep, perhaps with a light touch on her shoulder or a softly spoken word, a common endearment. You might offer a soft, "Hey, the giant sky fireball will be up soon," rather than the less romantic. Though equally true, if we don't make bread, we don't eat. Subtlety, even in ancient times, was likely key to marital harmony before the day's full energies, or the equivalent of morning coffee, had taken hold. She blinks, her eyes adjusting to the dimness, a familiar sleepy sigh perhaps escaping her lips as she too begins the slow process of rejoining the waking world. Her routine will soon mirror yours, the visit to the water basin, the quick refreshment, and the mental cataloging of the household tasks that await her nimble hands and careful management. Then, the children. The children begin to stir. A process that can range from instantaneous energetic explosion for the more boisterous or naturally early risers to something more akin to persuading a very small, sleepy boulder to roll gently downhill for those who cling more tenaciously to the embrace of sleep. Some parental challenges, it seems, are truly timeless across the millennia. One of the older ones might sit up abruptly, already chattering about a dream or an anticipated activity, while a younger one might simply roll over, burrowing deeper into their mat with a soft, protesting murmur. If there's an infant in the household, their own distinct set of needs might soon make themselves known with a fretful whimper or a demanding cry that cuts through the otherwise hushed atmosphere. The soundtrack of your small house gradually shifts from what was essentially a solo breathing performance featuring you to a gentle, intimate ensemble of murmurs, shuffles, and the occasional mysterious thud from the corner where the youngest is perhaps attempting to reenact a particularly vivid dream about wrestling a giant fig. It's the ancient Egyptian version of a morning zoo, albeit a very quiet and sleepy one. You hear the soft padding of small, bare feet on the packed earth floor as a child makes their way, still half asleep, towards their mother. There are yawns, deep and uninhibited, the sound of limbs stretching, the rustle of linen coverings being pushed aside or readjusted, the distinct, rhythmic gurgle of water being poured from the ewer into the basin will soon repeat itself several times as each member of the family who is old enough takes their turn to perform their own version of the morning rinse. The dim light, still more gray than gold, begins to reveal more detail as your eyes, and theirs, become fully accustomed to it. You see the familiar shapes of your loved ones. The curve of a small shoulder, the tousled dark hair of a child, the silhouette of your wife as she perhaps kneels by the water basin. The ancient Egyptian family, especially in close-knit and often interrelated artisan communities like Deir el-Medina, was typically nuclear, father, mother, and their children forming the core unit. This is a mainstream historical fact. However, these nuclear families were deeply embedded within a larger network of extended kin, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, who often lived in adjacent houses or nearby, forming a strong, resilient social and economic support system that was crucial for navigating the challenges of life. Your immediate household, now slowly coming alive, is the primary building block of this larger communal structure. As the children more fully awaken, you might catch glimpses of their own small worlds. Perhaps a favorite toy lies where it was dropped the previous evening, a carved wooden animal, a hippo, a dog, or a lively jumping jack figure whose limbs could be made to dance with the pull of a string. Or maybe a simple doll, fashioned from linen scraps and stuffed with reeds. Perhaps with a crudely painted face, or even a tiny wig made from real human hair or plant fibers. It's a charming, quirky tidbit that children in ancient Egypt, much like children everywhere and always, had a rich play life, with toys and games designed to entertain, educate, and mimic adult activities. These simple playthings, scattered briefly before being tidied away, are a poignant reminder of the universal constants of childhood. The atmosphere within your dwelling changes subtly with each awakening member. The air, once cool and still, now carries the faint warmth of more bodies, the almost imperceptible scent of human presence. Low voices begin to murmur, soft and husky with sleep. Greetings are exchanged. Perhaps a simple neferwaj good morning or just a nod and a sleepy smile. An older child might be quietly reminded by your wife of a small morning chore they are expected to perform, such as tidying the sleeping mats once everyone is up, or ensuring the cover is replaced on the main water storage jar. Historians still argue whether the typical morning routine within an ancient Egyptian artisan's family involved a strict, predetermined and rigidly enforced order of waking and tasks for each individual member based on age and gender, or if it was a more fluid and organically managed process, adapting daily based on individual habits, specific needs of the moment, and the overall flow of the household's energy. Practicality likely played a large role, with tasks being shared or assigned as made most sense for the smooth running of the home. The house is no longer just a collection of sleeping forms. It is transforming into a hive of quiet, purposeful, and cooperative activity, each person a thread in the unfolding tapestry of the family's morning. The low hum of your awakening household now provides a gentle soundscape to the dim interior of your mud brick home, with basic ablutions attended to by most. A pressing, practical need asserts itself, one that underpins every subsequent activity of the day. Fresh water. The water jar used for the morning's rinsing is likely running low, and a new supply is essential for drinking, for the preparation of the breakfast porridge or bread, for any further cleaning, and perhaps for a few carefully tended plants in a small household pot or patch of earth. It's time for the ancient Egyptian equivalent of the making a coffee run. Except instead of a fancy barista-crafted latte, you're fetching several gallons of absolutely life-sustaining H2O. And there's definitely no loyalty card offering you a free 10th trip for your efforts. This vital task might fall to you, as one of the stronger adults in the household, or perhaps to your wife, whose domain includes the management of such essential domestic resources. An older, sturdy child might also be tasked with assisting or even undertaking the journey themselves if the distance isn't too great and the load manageable. Whoever is designated for this crucial errand will now select the appropriate vessels. These are typically large, robust pottery jars, some with rounded bases specifically designed to be balanced on the head with the aid of a padded ring of cloth. Others with sturdy loop handles for carrying by hand or slung over the shoulder with a rope. Their interiors are swillied out, if needed, and they stand empty, a hollow promise of the bounty they will soon contain. You, or the designated family water carrier, now step out of the comparative dimness and stillness of your home into the nascent light of the early morning village. The air outside is noticeably cooler, carrying a different character than that within your walls, perhaps fresher, tinged with the scent of the wider desert or the collective faint aroma of many other households slowly coming to life. Doors of neighboring dwellings might be ajar, and you see other figures, draped in simple linen garments, emerging from their own mud brick homes, many clutching similar empty pots, all sharing the same fundamental morning purpose. The narrow, unpaved laneways of your village, perhaps a community like Deir el Medina. The specialized village of the royal tomb builders nestled in the Theban hills are still largely cast in shadow, though the eastern sky is now visibly paling, heralding the sun's imminent arrival. You might hear the distant braying of a donkey, the soft bleating of a goat from a nearby enclosure, or the occasional bark of a village dog. Sounds that are as much a part of the morning as the slowly increasing light. The path to the water source is well-worn, a familiar track trodden by countless feet over many years. The exact nature of this source is crucial. It could be a communal well dug deep into the earth to reach the water table, or a large, rock-cut or brick-lined cistern where water, perhaps brought from further afield, is stored. For the inhabitants of Deir el Medina, a mainstream historical fact is that their water supply presented a significant and constant logistical challenge due to the village's arid, isolated location away from the immediate banks of the Nile. While there may have been local wells, their output and quality were often insufficient. Thus, a considerable amount of water had to be laboriously transported, often by donkey train managed by designated state-supplied water bearers, from the Nile itself several miles away, to be stored in these communal reservoirs or distributed. Your trip might be to one of these central points. As you walk, you exchange muted greetings with your fellow villagers also embarked on this essential quest. A nod here, a softly spoken Nefer watch, a simple good morning there, the well or the cistern, wherever it may be, serves as the village's early morning newsfeed, less anxiety-inducing doom scroll. More along the lines of, did you hear Nact's favorite goat got loose again and ate Cenifer's prize-winning leeks? Or, is that new shipment of barley from the state granaries any good this time? Essential updates, really, for the smooth running of communal life. It's a place of low-key social interaction, a vital node in the village's communication network where news, observations, and perhaps a bit of harmless gossip are shared as pots are queued and filled. Reaching the water source, you might find a small gathering already there. The air filled with the sounds of ropes creaking if it's a deep, while being accessed with buckets made of leather or pottery. Or the more direct gurgle and splash as jars are dipped into a cistern or filled from a distribution point. There's a patient, unspoken rhythm to the process. You take your place, awaiting your turn. The empty weight of your pot a stark contrast to the full, precious load you will soon be shouldering. The water itself, when you finally get to lower your jar or direct the flow, looks cool and life-giving in the growing light. Its purity is always a slight concern. Egyptians sometimes used clarifying agents like alum if available, or would let water settle in jars for some time to allow sediment to fall. A quirky tidbit showing their practical attempts to improve water quality in a world without microbial science. Filling the heavy jars requires a degree of effort, a careful maneuvering to avoid waste. Once full, the journey back begins, and this is where the real physical work lies. Carrying these water pots is a full-body workout. Forget your fancy climate-controlled gym membership. This is functional fitness with a very direct and immediate impact on whether or not you get to make bread or quench your thirst today. No pain, no grain, as they probably didn't say. But the sentiment holds true. If balanced on the head, your neck and spine take the strain, requiring a steady, upright posture and a graceful, even gait. If carried by hand or on the shoulder, your arms and back muscles engage deeply. Every drop is precious, so you move with focused care, your attention on transporting your liquid cargo safely back to your expectant household. Historians still argue about the primary and most consistent source of potable water for the inhabitants of Deir el Medina throughout its long history. Was it a local, Possibly somewhat brackish well, subject to seasonal fluctuations? Or did the bulk of their daily drinking and cooking water truly rely entirely on the arduous, state-organized daily transport from the distant Nile, managed by these specialized water bearers and their donkey teams? The logistics of the latter are staggering to consider for a village of several hundred people. As you make your way back, the sun might just be beginning to peek over the eastern cliffs, its first rays painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, and instantly beginning to transform the temperature of the air. The precious water is delivered to your home, carefully decanted into the larger household storage jar, ready to play its indispensable role in the unfolding narrative of your family's breakfast and the remainder of their day. The precious, life-sustaining water, freshly drawn and now safely decanted into your household's main storage jar, stands as a cool, silent promise of refreshment and the foundation for the coming meal. With this elemental need met, the focus of domestic activity within your mud brick home shifts, almost instinctively, towards another equally fundamental requirement: the hearth. It is here, at this central point of warmth and transformation, that the raw ingredients you possess will be alchemically changed into nourishing food. But first, before any grinding or mixing can commence, the fire itself, the very heart of the hearth, must be awakened from its nightly slumber or, if necessary, coaxed anew into vibrant existence. This crucial task often falls to your wife, her hands long skilled in the delicate and patient art of summoning flame, though it's a vital skill that you and even older, responsible children would likely also possess and understand. Now begins the delicate, time-honored dance of fire starting. No casually clicking a lighter or turning a gas knob here, of course. This is elemental persuasion. A direct conversation with the very essence of combustion that requires patience, a gentle touch, and a distinct lack of flammable hair gel. Had such a product even been invented in your distant era, your hearth might be a simple, shallow pit dug into the packed earth floor of your main living area, perhaps ringed with a few carefully selected stones to contain the embers and support cooking vessels. Or it could be a slightly more structured, low clay oven, sometimes built into a corner of the room or against an outside wall if your home boasts a small, sheltered courtyard or a dedicated kitchen alcove. Many homes in artisan communities like Deir el Medina, archaeological excavations have revealed, possessed recognizable kitchen areas, sometimes featuring built-in beehive-shaped or conical bread ovens, beja, and designated storage bins for fuel and grain, indicating a fairly organized approach to daily food preparation, whatever its specific form. This morning it likely presents as a bed of cool, gray ashes, perhaps with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth still radiating from deep within its core, a hopeful memory of last night's fire. The first crucial step is a careful, almost reverent, investigation of these ashes. Your wife might use a small, pointed stick, or even her bare, callous fingers to gently probe and sift through the soft, powdery remnants of yesterday's fuel, if she is fortunate. And if the fire was properly banked the previous night by covering a few glowing coals with a thick layer of ash to starve them of oxygen and slow their burning, a tiny, precious spark, a single, resilient glowing speck of crimson red, might be found nestled amongst the charred remains. This is a small treasure, a significant shortcut in the often laborious fire-making process. If such an ember is indeed found, it's treated with the utmost care and respect. Gently uncovered and transferred to a small bed of the most delicate and easily ignitable tinder imaginable. Perhaps a wisp of dried grass gathered from the desert edge, a shred of old, discarded papyrus, or a few slivers of particularly flammable, resinous wood, shaved incredibly thin. She will then cup her hands around this nascent flame, or perhaps use a simple blowing tube fashioned from a hollow reed to direct a soft, steady stream of her own breath onto the ember, a life-giving force, until the spark catches, wavers, and finally, with a little sigh, a tiny, hesitant flame flickers into uncertain existence. If, However, the hearth is entirely cold, the ashes holding no remnant of yesterday's warmth. Then the process of creating fire anew is considerably more laborious and requires a different set of skills and tools. This is where the ingenious fire drill, a mainstream historical fact of ancient technology, comes into play. The most common type in ancient Egypt was likely the bow drill. This clever device consists of a wooden spindle, one end of which is set into a small depression on a stationary wooden hearthboard, often made of a softer wood, while the other is held in a socket or capstone, a bow. Its string wrapped once around the spindle is then rapidly moved back and forth, causing the spindle to rotate at high speed. This intense friction generates fire, superheated with dust that eventually ignites into a tiny, glowing coal. It requires considerable patience, well-practiced skill, and a fair amount of physical exertion. Alternatively, a simpler hand drill, where the spindle is rotated rapidly between the palms, could be used, though this is generally more tiring. Less common for daily domestic fire starting, but certainly known, was the method of striking a piece of flint against a mineral like pyrite or marcasite, which could produce a spark capable of igniting carefully prepared tinder. Once even the smallest flame is established, whether from a preserved ember or a newly generated spark, it needs to be nurtured with gentle patience. Small, dry twigs and finer pieces of kindling are added incrementally, arranged carefully to allow for adequate airflow, as too much fuel too soon will smother the fragile flame. The fuel for your fire is whatever the local environment and your family's means can provide. Wood, in the largely arid landscape of Egypt, is a relatively precious commodity, especially larger logs. And so it's used with care and economy. More common as a primary fuel, particularly in settled areas where animal husbandry was practiced, would be dried animal dung, typically from cattle, donkeys, or goats. The preferred fuel might be neatly formed, sun-dried animal dung patties. Don't knock it till you've tried it. It's the original biofuel, surprisingly effective, burning slowly and steadily with a good amount of heat, and gives a certain, uniquely rustic aroma to the morning's baking. Eau de bovine, perhaps? Reeds harvested from the Nile's banks, dried desert scrub brush, and even compacted bundles of straw could also be utilized to supplement the main fuel source. As the kindling catches and the flames begin to take hold more confidently, the first wisps of smoke begin to curl upwards, carrying the distinct, initially somewhat acrid aroma of whatever fuel is being consumed. If your hearth is located indoors, as many were, a small opening in the flat roof directly above, or a high vent in the wall, allows some of the smoke to escape, though a certain level of ambient smokiness within the dwelling, especially during cooking, was an accepted, if not always pleasant, part of daily life. Historians still argue about the typical daily fuel efficiency achieved with these simple hearths and ovens, and the effectiveness of smoke management within these relatively small, often poorly ventilated dwellings. Were the purpose-built smoke holes always adequate to the task? Or was a certain degree of interior smokiness, with its attendant eye irritation and respiratory implications, simply an unavoidable and accepted aspect of domestic life? Particularly during the cooler winter months when a fire might be kept burning for warmth as well as for cooking? The sounds of successful fire making now join the household's slowly growing morning symphony. The gentle, insistent crackle of the dry twigs, the softest as any residual moisture in the fuel meets the growing flame. The rhythmic whoosh of air if someone is fanning the nascent fire with a piece of woven palm leaf or a flat pottery shard to encourage its growth. The light from the burgeoning fire begins to dance with increasing confidence on the mud brick walls of your home, casting flickering, elongated shadows and bringing a warm, inviting orange glow to the face of your wife or whoever is tending it, their features illuminated in an almost reverent light. It's a comforting, primal sight, this contained inferno, a focus of warmth, activity, and impending sustenance. As the first real flames appear, it's a small but significant domestic victory. The fire isn't just for cooking the morning meal. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of the central heating system, the ever-ready kettle, and the gather round and tell stories hub, all rolled into one mesmerizing, flickering package. Plus, it has the added benefit of keeping the more shadowy, less defined figments of your pre-dawn imagination comfortably at bay. The Egyptians personified fire and recognized its dual nature, with goddesses like Sekhmet representing its destructive power, while fire was also fundamentally linked to Ra, the sun god, and the very act of creation and life. A quirky tidbit that underscores the profound respect, and perhaps a little fear, that this elemental force commanded. Your wife, or the designated fire tender, works with focused, well-honed expertise, her movements economical and precise, born of long practice. She knows instinctively just how much fuel to add, when to gently adjust the burning pieces for better airflow with a simple pair of iron or wooden fire tongs, and how to build the fire to the right intensity for the specific cooking tasks that will soon follow. The growing warmth from the now established hearth begins to permeate the room, a welcome sensation, actively chasing away the last stubborn vestiges of the night's pervasive chill. The fire is now truly alive, a small, contained sun reborn within your home, ready and waiting to transform simple, humble ingredients into the breakfast that will fuel your family for the labors of the day ahead. The fire on your hearth now crackles with a steady, purposeful energy, its warm, orange light pushing back the remaining shadows in your mud brick home, and its gentle heat beginning to take the edge off the pre-dawn chill. The water is secure. The fire is alive. The stage is set for the next act in the daily drama of sustenance. Attention now shifts to the very heart of your impending breakfast, the grain. For without flour, there can be no bread, and bread, along with its liquid cousin, beer, forms the absolute, unshakable foundation of the ancient Egyptian diet. With the fire cheerily blazing, it's time for the next stage in Operation Breakfast, flour production. This isn't a quick trip to the gleaming supermarket aisle for a conveniently packaged bag. This is the original from-scratch baking, starting with the rather fundamental step of persuading rocks to make food. Your wife, or perhaps an older daughter whose arms are strong enough for the task, moves towards the area where the household's precious grain supply is stored. This vital commodity is likely kept in large, sealed pottery jars with tight-fitting lids, or perhaps in a small, specially constructed mud brick silo or bin within the dwelling, all designed to protect the kernels as much as possible from the ever-present threats of moisture, hungry insects, and opportunistic rodents. The most common grain destined for bread is emmer wheat, a hardy ancient variety with a reddish-brown husk, though barley is also widely cultivated and used for both bread making and, crucially, for brewing the ubiquitous daily beer. She carefully measures out a portion of the hard, dry kernels, just enough for the morning's baking needs, and perhaps a little extra for a midday meal that you might carry with you to your work. Each grain is a tiny, concentrated parcel of potential energy, a gift from the fertile black lands along the Nile. The primary tool for transforming these resilient kernels into usable flour is the saddle quern, a simple yet remarkably effective milling device whose design has remained virtually unchanged for millennia across many cultures. It consists of two main parts, both fashioned from hard, durable stones such as sandstone, basalt, or granite. The lower, stationary stone, the quern itself, sometimes called a metate, is larger and heavier, with a slightly concave or saddle-shaped upper surface upon which the grain will be ground. This stone might be set directly onto the packed earth floor, perhaps resting on a piece of clean matting made of woven reeds or palm leaves, strategically placed to catch any stray flour that might escape during the vigorous grinding process. The second part is the smaller, handheld upper stone, often referred to as a muller, a rubber, or a mano. This is typically elongated or loaf-shaped, designed to be comfortably and firmly gripped with both hands. The working surfaces of these stones, both the quern and the muller, are often worn impressively smooth, sometimes even slightly polished, from countless hours, days, and years, perhaps even generations, of use, a silent testament to the endless, repetitive labor of women who have performed this very same essential task. Your wife or daughter now kneels or sits comfortably behind the saddle quern, positioning herself for the rhythmic, strenuous work ahead. She carefully spreads a handful of the emmer wheat kernels onto the slightly sloping surface of the larger stone. Then, grasping the muller firmly, she begins the grinding process. It's a specific, learned motion, a powerful combination of sustained downward pressure and a strong, sweeping back and forth movement, rocking and sliding the upper stone across the bed of grain. The sound begins almost immediately, sharp and distinct in the quiet of the morning. A gritty, rhythmic, scraping scrunch. Scrunch as stone meets stone with the grain caught between. A sound that speaks of effort and transformation. The characteristic sound of grinding, a sort of scratch, soon becomes the dominant feature of your village's emerging morning soundtrack. It's like an ancient, widely dispersed industrial band, but instead of producing heavy metal tunes, they're diligently manufacturing the makings of, well, potentially heavy bread, depending on the grind. This is not light work by any stretch of the imagination. It requires considerable upper body strength, particularly in the arms, shoulders, and back, as well as good core stability and stamina. The repetitive, forceful motion is tiring, a true physical exertion. As she grinds, a fine, pale dust of flour begins to fill the air immediately around her, settling lightly like a ghostly powder on her hair, her simple linen garment, and the mat beneath the quern. The distinct, slightly sweet and earthy aroma of freshly milled grain, a smell that is both dry and nourishing, mingles with the sharper scent of the wood smoke now emanating more confidently from the hearth. Slowly, laboriously, a small pile of coarse, pale flour begins to accumulate at the far end of the saddle stone, pushed there incrementally by the consistent motion of the muller. She might pause occasionally to carefully sweep this precious, hard-won flour into a waiting pottery bowl or onto a piece of clean, stretched linen, and then to add more fresh grain to the surface of the quern before resuming the hypnotic back-and-forth rhythm. The resulting flour, even after a bit of optimistic sieving, perhaps through a loosely woven mesh made of palm fibers or treated animal hair to remove the largest pieces of bran or any errant bits of stone that manage to flake off the quern, will likely have a certain geological character. Think of it as naturally fortified, with added mineral content, a daily dental challenge for the whole family, and a constant, gritty reminder that your daily bread is truly, and quite literally, one with the earth. Indeed, it's a mainstream historical fact that the inescapable grit from these stone grinding tools was a major contributing factor to the significant dental attrition and wear so commonly observed in the th of ancient Egyptian mummies across all social classes. So, while this flour is the very stuff of life, it also brings with it a slow, abrasive cost. The rhythmic, pervasive sound of the grinding stone is a familiar and almost comforting backdrop to the developing morning's domestic activities. Soon, you might begin to hear similar sounds drifting from neighboring homes, as other households also engage in this same essential task, a collective, village-wide hum of domestic industry. A symphony of stone on grain. It's a sound that speaks of continuity, of the unbroken chain of daily effort required for survival and sustenance in this ancient land. So fundamental was this activity to Egyptian life and their conception of the afterlife, that it's a quirky tidbit that miniature, often beautifully crafted, models of people, almost invariably women, diligently grinding grain at a saddle quern are commonly found in tombs from many periods. These tiny servant figures were believed to magically continue their essential labors in the great beyond, ensuring that the deceased would never go without their daily bread and beer. the staples of eternal existence just as they were in mortal life. Your wife or daughter works steadily, her movements practiced and efficient, her body swaying in a familiar rhythm with the movement of the stone. There's a focused concentration in her efforts, her entire being devoted to this crucial transformation. Historians still argue about the average daily time commitment that was typically required for grain grinding in an artisan household like yours. Was it a task that consumed several uninterrupted hours of strenuous labor each morning, or was it perhaps broken into shorter, more frequent sessions throughout the day, depending on immediate needs and the availability of labor? Regardless of the exact schedule, the growing mound of freshly ground flour in the collection bowl is a deeply welcome sight, a tangible and satisfying reward for her significant physical labor. And the fragrant, dusty promise of the simple, nourishing meal that is steadily drawing closer. The rhythmic, abrasive song of stone grinding stone has now ceased, leaving a fine, almost palpable dust of freshly milled flour hanging faintly in the air of your home, mingling with the comforting warmth and smoky scent of the steadily burning hearth. In a wide, shallow pottery bowl, a testament to the potter's own skilled craft, rests a small mountain of this precious flour, likely still slightly warm from the friction of its creation. This is the fruit of considerable labor, the very essence of the emmer wheat or barley painstakingly transformed from hard, unyielding kernels into the potential for sustenance. The fire glows with readiness. The water fetched earlier stands cool and waiting. The next crucial stage in this ancient culinary ritual now begins. The delicate and skilled process of transforming this humble, dusty flour into a pliable, workable dough, the direct ancestor of the bread that will soon grace your morning meal. Now for the magical moment where dust becomes dough. It's a process-less gourmet cooking show with perfectly measured ingredients and dramatic reveals, and more ancient, practical alchemy fueled by intuition, hope, and a good deal of focused elbow grease. Abracadabra, let there be carbs. Your wife, her hands already dusted with a fine layer of the pale flour, takes charge of this transformation. She might first gently sift the flour one more time, perhaps through a loosely woven sieve made from palm fibers or even horsehair stretched taut over a wooden frame, to remove any larger particles of bran that escape the initial grinding ore. More importantly, any errant tiny flecks of stone from the quern itself. Perfection in terms of fineness isn't the primary goal. A certain rustic coarseness is expected and accepted. Utility and nourishment are paramount. Once satisfied, she creates a depression, a small crater, in the center of the flour mound within the bowl. Into this welcoming well, she begins to pour a measure of the cool, fresh water, adding it not all at once, but gradually, with the careful judgment born of countless repetitions of this very act. Her experienced hands then begin the gentle work of incorporation. She draws the dry, powdery flour from the edges of the bowl inwards, towards the growing moistness at the center. Her fingers acting as natural mixing tools. The flour, thirsty after its dry creation, eagerly drinks the water. Initially, the mixture is a somewhat unpromising, sticky, and rather lumpy mass, clinging to her fingers and the sides of the bowl. But as she continues to work it, adding a little more water here to absorb a dry patch, perhaps a tiny sprinkle more flour there if the mixture seems too slack, its fundamental character begins to change, to cohere. This is where her innate skill and practiced intuition truly come into play, a knowledge held more in her hands and eyes than in any written recipe. Your wife, a seasoned dough whisperer, knows just the right amount of water to add through feel and observation. Too much, and you risk ending up with something akin to primordial ooze, difficult to shape and bake. Too little, and the result is a stiff, unyielding mass that could easily become an edible rock upon baking. It's a fine, delicate line, walked with quiet confidence almost daily. A pinch of salt might be added at this stage, if your household has access to it, and if it's a common practice for your daily bread. Salt was certainly available in ancient Egypt. sourced from mineral deposits in the western desert oases like Siwa or from coastal lagoons, and it was valued not only for seasoning food but also for its preservative qualities, particularly for fish and meat. Its inclusion would add a subtle depth of flavor to the otherwise plain bread. The question of leavening now also comes to the fore, a topic that keeps food historians happily engaged in scholarly discussion. Historians still argue about the prevalence and specific methods of leavening used in the everyday bread of common Egyptians during this period. Was a carefully saved portion of sour dough from a previous baking session, teeming with wild yeasts, the standard leavening agent? Was barm, the froth rich in yeast skimmed from fermenting beer, commonly transferred from the brewery to the bakery, or were quick, simple, unleavened flatbreads the most frequent daily reality for the majority of working families, especially for a rapid morning meal? For today's breakfast, if time is a factor, an unleavened dough is quicker. However, the Egyptians were undeniably skilled in harnessing the power of yeast, a mainstream historical fact demonstrated by their sophisticated production of both leavened bread and various types of beer. If a leavening agent is used, perhaps a piece of starter dough that your wife carefully maintained, feeding it daily with a little flour and water, it would be incorporated now. It's slightly tangy. Fermented aroma subtly joining the sweet, earthy scent of the wet flour. Once the initial mixing is complete and the dough has achieved a basic cohesion, the real work of developing its structure begins: kneading. Kneading this dough is the original stress relief therapy, long before scented candles and mindfulness apps. Got a brewing problem with the new foreman? Annoyed by a particularly noisy neighbor's donkey? Take it out on the dough. It can certainly take it, and it might even taste better for it. Probably. Your wife likely turns the rough ball of dough out onto a clean, flat, and lightly dusted surface, perhaps a large, smooth stone slab kept specifically for this purpose, a well-worn wooden board, or even the upturned base of a large pottery platter. She then begins the rhythmic, energetic process, pushing the dough away from her with the heel of her hand, then folding it over onto itself, giving it a slight turn, and repeating the motion over and over again. This action, seemingly simple, is crucial for developing the gluten within the emmer wheat, though emmer gluten behaves differently from modern bread wheat gluten, forming a less elastic but still serviceable network. The sound of her hands working the dough, a soft, rhythmic slapping, thudding, and squishing, fills the quiet hum of domestic activity in your home. The dough gradually transforms under her capable hands. Its initial shaggy, uneven, and perhaps slightly sticky texture slowly gives way to a smoother, more uniform, and more elastic consistency. It becomes less inclined to cling to her fingers and more responsive to her manipulations. She knows by its feel, its subtle springiness when pressed, its resistance, its overall texture between her palms, when it has been worked sufficiently. This is a tactile art, a form of practical knowledge passed down through generations of women from mother to daughter. An unbroken chain of culinary wisdom. While this breakfast bread is humble, it's a quirky tidbit that for special occasions or temple offerings, Egyptian bakers could get quite elaborate. Sometimes adding ingredients like honey, ground dates or figs, various spices, milk, or even oil to enrich their doughs, creating a wide variety of cakes and sweetened breads. Your daily loaf, however, relies on the honest simplicity of flour, water, and skill. The prepared dough, now smooth and ready, might be formed into a neat ball and placed back in the bowl, perhaps covered with a piece of clean linen, to rest for a short while before shaping, especially if it contains leaven and needs a little time to begin its slow, magical rise. The air in your home is now thick with the combined scents of the burning fire, the freshly ground flour, and the subtly changing aroma of the developing dough. It's a comforting, deeply domestic perfume, the smell of impending sustenance and a home well tended. The bowl of dough, having been skillfully mixed and diligently kneaded, now sits as a soft, yielding promise of the meal to come. If it contained a leavening agent, perhaps a piece of sourdough saved from yesterday's batch or a little barm from a broom investment, it might have risen slightly during a brief resting period, becoming marginally lighter and more aerated, its surface gently domed. Even if unleavened and destined to be simple flatbread, the rest would have allowed the flour to fully hydrate and the gluten to relax, making the dough more pliable and easier to work with. Your wife, the chief architect of this foundational food, now approaches it again, her hands lightly dusted with a fine scattering of flour to prevent sticking, ready for the next crucial stage. Shaping these humble masses into the individual loaves that will soon meet the transformative heat of the hearth. Now it's time to give these doughy blobs some personality, or at least a shape that won't immediately roll off the hearth into the dusty unknown. Think less artisan boulangerie with perfectly sculpted facelles and api, and more functional fuel disk engineering, designed for maximum edibility and minimal fuss. She turns the bulk of the dough out from its resting bowl onto the same clean, prepared surface previously used for kneading, perhaps that trusty flat stone slab, the well-worn wooden board, or the smooth, upturned base of a large pottery platter, all still bearing a faint powdery residue of flour. With practiced hands, she gently deflates the dough if it has risen, pressing the air out with a soft sigh. Then begins the task of portioning. Your wife portions out the dough with the practiced eye of a seasoned quartermaster, ensuring fair and equitable carb distribution amongst the family members. No time-consuming weighing scales here. Her judgment is guided by experience, ensuring each piece is roughly equivalent, enough to satisfy one person for the morning meal, perhaps with a little left over. She might tear the dough with her strong fingers, or if it's a particularly large batch or a stiffer dough, she might use a simple, sharp-edged implement, perhaps a shaped flake of flint or a repurposed piece of bronze, though for most daily tasks, hands are the primary and most versatile tools. Once divided into smaller, more manageable lumps, the actual shaping begins. For a typical, everyday breakfast in an artisan's household, elaborate forms are neither necessary nor practical. The most common shapes are likely to be simple, round, flattish discs or slightly thicker oval patties. These are practical for several reasons. They cook relatively quickly and evenly, especially when baked directly on a hot stone or in hot ashes, and their flat nature makes them easy to hold, to tear, and to use for scooping up other morsels of food if the meal includes any relishes or dips, though your simple breakfast today might not feature such additions. She takes a piece of dough, rolls it briefly between her floured palms to create a smooth ball, then flattens it either by pressing down with her hand or by using a simple rolling motion on the floured surface. A rudimentary rolling pin, perhaps just a smooth, cylindrical piece of wood, might be employed by some, though skilled hands can often achieve the desired flatness just as effectively. The ancient Egyptians, as a mainstream historical fact, were familiar with a surprisingly wide array of bread shapes and types, as evidenced by artistic depictions in tombs, hieroglyphic lists of offerings, and even actual preserved loaves found in funerary caches. These ranged from these simple daily flatbreads and small round loaves to more complex conical shapes, often baked in distinctive pottery molds, triangular pieces, braided breads, and even loaves shaped like animals or human figures, particularly for religious or ceremonial purposes. Your breakfast bread, however, is all about unpretentious utility. These aren't going to be sourdough masterpieces with intricate, razor-slash-scoring patterns that look like a cryptic map to a hidden treasure. The main aesthetic goals here are vaguely circular or oval, and, most importantly, cooks all the way through without becoming a charcoal briquette. Bonus points are awarded if it doesn't stick too badly to the hot stone during baking. Her hands move with a deftness and economy of motion that speaks of countless repetitions of this task. There's a tactile intelligence at play, a deep understanding of how the dough responds to pressure, how it stretches, how it holds its form. She ensures each loaf is of a relatively consistent thickness, crucial for even baking. A loaf with thick and thin patches will inevitably result in some parts being burnt while others remain sadly doughy. The texture of the dough under her fingers is soft and yielding, yet with a certain resilience. The light dusting of flour on her hands and the work surface prevents excessive sticking, allowing her to manipulate the dough smoothly. The subtle, slightly sweet and earthy aroma of the raw emmer wheat, perhaps with that faint sour tang if a starter was used, intensifies just a little as the dough is worked and its surface area exposed to the air. As each loaf is shaped to her satisfaction, it is carefully placed aside on a clean, floured surface, perhaps another woven reed mat reserved for this purpose, a large, flat pottery tray, or simply a piece of clean linen cloth spread out nearby. If the dough is leavened, these shaped loaves might be left for a short final proofing period, allowing the yeast to continue its work, producing more carbon dioxide and giving the bread a lighter, more open texture upon baking. During this time, they might be covered loosely with another piece of linen to protect them from dust and to prevent their surfaces from drying out and forming a premature crust, which could inhibit their final rise in the oven or on the hearth. It's a quirky tidbit that while your daily bread is shaped for pure functionality, the symbolic power of bread and its shaping was well understood in ancient Egypt. For temple offerings or important feasts, bakers might go to extraordinary lengths, using special molds or intricate hand-shaping techniques to create loaves that were not just food but also potent symbols. Loaves shaped like ankhs, the symbol of life, or in the forms of sacred animals like oxen or gazelles, or even stylized human figures, would have carried deep religious or magical significance, intended to nourish the gods or the spirits of the deceased in a way that transcended mere physical sustenance. Historians still argue whether the ubiquitous small, round pita-like flatbreads depicted in so many offering scenes were typically baked in such a way as to be hollow and pocket-forming, as seen in some modern Middle Eastern bread traditions which may have ancient roots, or if they were generally denser and flatter in their most common ancient Egyptian form. The evidence from preserved loaves is varied, suggesting perhaps both types existed depending on the specific recipe and baking method. For now, you're neatly formed. Humble discs of dough lie in quiet anticipation, their fate soon to be entrusted to the transformative power of the waiting fire. The neatly formed discs or slightly domed rounds of dough now lie in quiet repose, perhaps on a floured mat or a piece of clean linen, their brief rest complete, their destiny awaiting the fiery embrace of the hearth. Your wife, having skillfully guided them through the stages of mixing, kneading, and shaping, now turns her full attention to the fire itself, which has been diligently maintained, its embers glowing with a fierce, contained heat, its flames dancing with an eager, purposeful light. The air around the hearth already carries a noticeable warmth, a localized intensity that speaks of its readiness. It's showtime for the dough. This is the fiery crucible, the ancient earthen kiln, where humble flour and water blobs are about to achieve their glorious, edible destiny. Or, potentially become slightly charred. Overly crispy hockey pucks if someone gets momentarily distracted by a particularly interesting desert gecko skittering across the wall. The method of baking will depend largely on the specific type of hearth or oven your household possesses. If it's a simple, open hearth, she might have already placed a large, flat stone, perhaps a piece of sandstone or a thick pottery shard specifically reserved for this purpose, directly into the heart of the glowing embers to absorb their intense heat. Once the stone is deemed sufficiently scorching, it will be carefully brushed clean of any clinging ash with a bundle of twigs or a piece of stiffened cloth. The raw loaves will then be laid directly onto its superheated surface. They will cook quickly this way, the direct, intense heat causing them to puff up, perhaps blister in places, and develop a delightful, slightly charred exterior. Alternatively, for some types of flatbread, the dough might be placed directly onto a clean section of the hot hearth itself. or even nestled carefully within the hot ashes, a technique requiring constant vigilance to prevent outright burning. If your home is equipped with a more structured, dedicated bread oven, and ancient Egyptians had various types, a mainstream historical fact, ranging from simple hearths to more sophisticated upright, cylindrical, or conical clay ovens that could achieve and retain very high temperatures, common in communities like Deir el Medina. The process involves a different kind of skill. These ovens, often called beja or perhaps tanner in a more general sense, would have been preheated by allowing a substantial fire to blaze vigorously within their clay confines. Once the thick oven walls are radiating an intense, almost palpable heat, the bulk of the embers and any remaining unburnt fuel are often raked out or pushed safely to one side. Then, with remarkable dexterity and often using a long-handled wooden paddle or even just her well-floured hands, your wife might slap the prepared loaves of dough directly onto the scorching hot interior vertical walls of the oven, where they miraculously stick and bake rapidly in the powerful, retained heat. This method often produces a wonderfully crisp crust and a beautifully baked interior. Historians still argue about the precise baking times and the level of temperature control that was realistically achievable in these ancient domestic ovens using the available fuels like wood or dried dung, and how these critical variables might have consistently influenced the final texture, crumb structure, and even the overall digestibility of the daily bread consumed by different households. It was an art refined by generations of experience, not by precise thermostats. Regardless of the exact method, your wife now watches the baking process with an unwavering, eagle-eyed focus. There are no ticking timers here, no digital temperature displays to consult. Her judgment is entirely reliant on a deep well of accumulated experience, on the subtle visual cues of the bread's transformation, the way it colors, the degree to which it swells or blisters, and on the evolving aroma, and perhaps even the sound it makes of tap. She might use a long, thin stick or a flat piece of wood, its end perhaps charred from previous use, to carefully turn the loaves partway through the baking, ensuring they cook evenly on all sides, or to skillfully shift them away from a particularly aggressive hot spot in the hearth or oven that threatens to scorch one edge before the rest is done. And then, the aroma. Soon, the air within your small dwelling, already carrying the foundational sense of wood smoke from the hearth and the faint, earthy sweetness of raw flour, begins to be suffused with a new, utterly captivating and deeply comforting perfume, that of baking bread. It's a scent so powerful, so universally beloved across cultures and millennia. It could probably halt minor domestic squabbles in their tracks, or at least make everyone momentarily forget what they were mildly irritated about until after they've eaten. This warm, toasty, slightly sweet, and, if leavened, subtly yeasty fragrance grows in intensity, escaping the confines of your home and wafting out through the doorway or the high ventilation slits, mingling with similar delicious scents emanating from neighboring homes. It's a collective, olfactory announcement to the entire village that breakfast, the first and perhaps most eagerly anticipated meal of the day, is very near. The loaves themselves visibly transform under the influence of the intense heat. They're pale. Doughy surfaces begin to take on color, shifting from a creamy beige to a warm, inviting golden hue, then deepening to a rich, appetizing brown, perhaps even tinged with darker, almost charred patches where they've been closest to the most intense heat source. If the dough was leavened, the loaves swell and puff gratifyingly, their surfaces becoming taut and often beautifully blistered. Steam, carrying that irresistible bread scent, might escape from small cracks that form in their developing crusts. The sight of this transformation is almost as satisfying as the aroma itself. Your wife, a true traditionalist in the most literal sense, expertly judges when the loaves have reached perfection. No fancy pop-up oven thermometers here, just the ancestral wisdom passed down through her mother and grandmother. Does it look vaguely golden and inviting? And does it sound hollow when you carefully retrieve one and thump its underside with your knuckle? Or does it emit more of a dull, unpromising thud, like a damp sandbag? These are crucial distinctions in the art of ancient baking. It's a quirky tidbit that bread, beyond its primary role as sustenance, often served as a form of currency or payment in ancient Egypt, particularly within the complex state-run ration systems that supplied workers on major projects, including the tomb builders of your own community. The very loaves now baking, which will form the core of your breakfast, are therefore not just food. They represent a tangible form of wealth, the very stuff that enables your labor and sustains your family's existence. After what seems like an eternity to a keenly anticipating stomach, but is in reality a relatively short period, your wife, satisfied with their color, sound, and magnificent aroma, carefully removes the perfectly baked loaves from the heat using her wooden paddle or well-protected hands. She places them onto a clean reed mat or a large pottery tray to cool just slightly. Their crusts crisp and fragrant, their interiors steaming invitingly when one is eventually broken open. The sight of this fresh, golden bounty is a reward in itself, a testament to skill, patience, and the successful collaboration between human effort and the elemental power of fire. The aroma of freshly baked bread, golden crusted and divinely fragrant, now thoroughly saturates the air within your small mud brick dwelling, a warm, comforting cloud that speaks directly to the soul, or at least to a very empty stomach. The loaves, perhaps piled carefully on a clean reed mat or a large, shallow pottery platter, steam gently in the slightly cooler air of the room, their surfaces still radiating a delicious heat, their crusts making tiny, satisfied crackling sounds as they begin to cool. But even this most perfect of foods, this staff of life, rarely stands entirely alone in the culinary traditions of ancient Egypt, especially for a meal intended to provide balanced sustenance for a long and arduous day of skilled labor. Attention now subtly shifts towards preparing the fresh, crisp, and often pungent accompaniments that will add vital flavor, contrasting textures, and essential nutrients to your morning repast. With the bread cooling and perfuming the entire neighborhood with its irresistible invitation, it's time for the salad course ancient Egyptian style, which, if we're being perfectly honest, mostly means onions, and then probably some more onions, and perhaps a radish or two, if you're feeling particularly exotic and the garden or market has been kind. Hope you like onions. Your wife, or perhaps an older child now entrusted with this relatively simple but important task, moves to select the vegetables for the meal from your household stores. These are likely to be some of the true stalwarts, the unsung heroes of the ancient Egyptian diet. Onions in their various forms, perhaps some sharp, peppery radishes, and maybe a clove or two of garlic or some tender leeks if they are available. Onions, it cannot be overstated, were an absolute cornerstone of Egyptian cuisine and daily life, consumed with gusto by all social classes. Not just the large, dry-skinned bulb onions that we might immediately picture, but also, and perhaps especially for a quick morning meal, fresh green onions, what we might call scallions or spring onions, pulled young and tender from the earth, their long green stalks and small white bulbs offering a sharp, verdant, almost aggressive bite that provides a welcome, palate-cleansing contrast to the mild, comforting richness of the bread. Radishes, with their satisfyingly crisp texture and peppery tang, were also immensely popular, adding another layer of sensory interest. The source of these vegetables could be varied, depending on your specific circumstances and the season. If your family is fortunate enough to have access to a small patch of cultivated ground near your dwelling, and archaeological evidence from villages like Deir el-Medina suggests that some artisans indeed maintain tiny, intensively worked garden plots, watered by hand with precious, carried water. These vegetables might be freshly picked, their connection to the earth still vibrant. More commonly, perhaps, they were acquired through the state-organized ration system that supplied the royal workforce, as onions and garlic were frequently listed among the provisions. It's a mainstream historical fact, famously recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, that inscriptions on the Great Pyramid detailed the vast quantities of radishes, onions, and garlic purportedly consumed by the laborers during its construction, a clear testament to the recognized importance of these alliums in fueling even the most monumental of undertakings. Alternatively, they might have been bartered for in the village from neighbors with more productive gardens or purchased from itinerant sellers who brought produce from the more fertile agricultural lands closer to the Nile. The preparation of these breakfast vegetables is refreshingly, wonderfully minimalist. There's no intricate julienning required here, no laborious spiralizing into decorative ribbons, and certainly no foam of dehydrated radish essence with a hint of desert truffle. The vegetable prep is refreshingly simple. No need for a mandolin slicer or a 15-step vinaigrette recipe passed down from a celebrity chef sphinx who only communicates in riddles. Just wash, chop, or often, don't even chop, and serve. Efficiency, after all, is the very mother of ancient invention, especially when you have tombs to decorate before the midday heat becomes truly oppressive. The onions, if they are the small bulk type, might be peeled and roughly sliced or quartered, or if they are spring onions, simply washed thoroughly, their roots trimmed, and served whole or cut into manageable lengths. Radishes are typically washed, their leafy tops and stringy roots removed, and then left whole if small, or perhaps halved or quartered if larger. Garlic cloves, if used to accompany the bread directly, though often reserved more for flavoring cooked dishes, would be peeled, their potent, sulfurous aroma released with the breaking of their skin. Lettuce, too, could feature, particularly the tall, spear-like variety known as Min or Roman lettuce, which, unlike modern head lettuces, grew in an upright form. Its leaves, providing a fresh, slightly bitter, and crisp counterpoint, would be washed and served largely unadorned. These aren't your delicate, modern, hydroponically grown microgreens or perfectly unblemished heirloom tomatoes. These are robust, no-nonsense vegetables that have likely seen a bit of desert sun and felt the grit of the earth. They are ready to add some serious, unadulterated zing to your morning carb load. They're the horticultural equivalent of a good, strong, pungent wake-up call for your taste buds. Once washed and prepared, these vegetables are typically placed into a simple communal pottery bowl, or perhaps arranged directly on the clean eating mat alongside the still warm bread. The vibrant colors, the sharp, glossy white and vivid green of the onions, the bright ruby red or pristine white of the radishes, the cool, pale green of the lettuce leaves, would look strikingly fresh and appetizing against the warm, earthy tones of your handmade pottery or the woven texture of the mat. The onion, in particular, held a significance in ancient Egypt that extended far beyond its culinary utility. It's a quirky tidbit that onions were not just a ubiquitous food item, but also possessed considerable ritualistic and symbolic importance. They were sometimes used in funerary practices, for instance. Onions or their skins have been found carefully placed in the abdominal cavities, alongside the ears, and even in the eye sockets of some royal mummies, such as that of Pharaoh Ramesses IV. The exact reasoning remains a subject of discussion, but it's speculated they might have been thought to aid in magical reanimation, to provide a symbolic connection to life and breath. Or perhaps their strong odor was believed to repel malevolent forces. Furthermore, onions were sometimes sworn upon in oaths, their concentric, layered structure perhaps seen as a potent symbol of eternity, interconnectedness, or the many unfolding layers of truth and reality. So, that humble onion you're about to munch on is carrying a surprising amount of cultural baggage. Historians still argue about the year-round availability and true dietary variety of fresh vegetables for the average artisan family in ancient Egypt. Did their daily diet, particularly during the hottest summer months or periods of potential drought or disruption to Nile flood patterns, rely more heavily on more easily storable items like dried pulses, lentils, chickpeas, beans, preserved fish, and various storable roots and tubers, or was a reasonably consistent supply of fresh greens and other common vegetables more common than previously thought, perhaps sustained through surprisingly intensive small-scale horticulture, careful water management, and local trade networks even in arid environments like Deir el Medina? The exact balance likely fluctuated with season and circumstance. For now, though, the sight of these crisp, clean, and pungent vegetables alongside the fragrant bread signals that your simple but wholesome breakfast is very nearly ready to be enjoyed. The warm, fragrant loaves of freshly baked bread, their crust perhaps still faintly crackling as they cool, now sit patiently alongside the small, vibrant pile of sharply scented onions and crisp radishes. This robust, savory, and pungent foundation for your morning meal is almost complete, a testament to careful preparation and the bounty of the cultivated earth. But the ancient Egyptian palate, much like our own across the vast expanse of time, often appreciated, and indeed benefited from, a touch of natural sweetness to round out the flavors, to provide a quick burst of energy, and to offer a simple, uncomplicated pleasure. After the potential onslaught of onions, your palate might be crying out for something a little less aggressive, something that soothes rather than startles. Fear not, for nature's ancient candy store is now open for business, offering a delightful, if limited, array of things that don't necessarily make your eyes water merely by looking at them. The most common and readily available sources of this welcome sweetness in your world are likely to be fruits, particularly the venerable date and the humble figure. Date palms, with their tall, slender trunks and feather-like fronds, are an iconic and deeply cherished feature of the Egyptian landscape, thriving in verdant clusters along the Nile Valley and in the life-giving oases that dot the stark desert. Their fruit, the date, is a true nutritional powerhouse, densely packed with natural sugars like fructose and glucose, providing readily available energy along with essential fiber, and a surprising range of vitamins and minerals. Dates were an absolute staple food in ancient Egypt, a mainstream historical fact, consumed with appreciation by everyone from the mighty pharaoh down to the most humble peasant farmer or laborer like yourself. They could be enjoyed fresh from the tree when in season, plump, juicy, and almost meltingly soft, or more commonly for daily, year-round use, they were dried, a process which concentrated their already considerable sweetness and allowed them to be stored for very long periods without spoilage, a crucial advantage in a pre-refrigeration era. Your wife might now produce a small, inviting handful of these dried dates, perhaps retrieved from a cool, dark pottery jar where they are kept safe from insects and excessive moisture, or from a tightly woven palm leaf basket. They are typically a rich, deep brown or almost black, their skins invitingly wrinkled and often glistening with a light, natural sugary bloom. Their flesh slightly sticky to the touch. Each one is a little, self-contained nugget of concentrated, portable energy. Dates were the original energy bar of the ancient world, compact, durable, and packed with enough natural sugar to make you feel like you could personally help hoist another massive obelisk into place, or at least face a long morning of meticulous hieroglyph carving with renewed vigor. Just be mindful of the hard, inedible pits within, as ancient Egyptian dentistry, while surprisingly advanced in some respects, wasn't exactly known for its painless emergency extractions or readily available cosmetic replacements. Their intense, almost caramelly sweetness provides a delightful and satisfying contrast to the more savory and pungent elements of your breakfast. A perfect finishing touch or a welcome interlude between bites of bread and onion. Figs, too, were a common and much-loved source of natural sweetness. The most prevalent variety in ancient Egypt was likely the fruit of the native sycamore fig tree, Ficus sycamoris, a large, spreading tree that offered welcome shade as well as nourishment. These sycamore figs are somewhat different from the common Mediterranean figs, Ficus carica, that many of us might be more familiar with today. They are often smaller, with a flesh that can be a bit less intensely sweet, but possesses a pleasant, unique, slightly earthy flavor and a subtly grainy texture from their myriad tiny seeds. Like dates, sycamore figs could be eaten fresh when ripe, picked directly from the tree, or they could be dried for later use, further concentrating their sugars. The sycamore fig tree itself, the Nahé tree as it was known, held a particularly special and sacred place in ancient Egyptian culture and religious belief. It's a quirky tidbit that this generous tree was considered sacred to several important goddesses, most notably Hathor, the benevolent goddess of love, joy, music, and motherhood, and Nut, the great sky goddess who arched protectively over the earth. These goddesses were sometimes depicted in art as emerging from or residing within the sheltering branches of a sycamore fig tree, offering its fruit and life-giving water to the souls of the deceased on their journey into the afterlife. Thus, eating a sycamore fig, even as part of a simple daily meal, might have carried for you a subtle, almost subconscious spiritual resonance, a fleeting connection to these divine feminine protectors and the promise of eternal sustenance. If figs are to grace your breakfast today, they add a softer, more yielding texture to the meal and a different kind of sweetness. Perhaps less overwhelmingly sugary than the concentrated power of a dried date, but no less welcome. They might be simply placed alongside the dates on the communal eating mat, another unadorned, natural offering to complete the morning's fare. Both dates and figs required little to no elaborate preparation beyond ensuring they were clean if fresh, or simply retrieved from storage if dried, making them an exceedingly easy and convenient addition to any meal, any time of day. Then there is honey, the undisputed champion of ancient sweeteners. Honey was the true gold standard of sweetness in the ancient world, the stuff of legends, divine offerings, and quite possibly Pharaoh's personal dessert table. If you, as a humble artisan, were fortunate enough to get even a small smear of actual, unadulterated honey on your breakfast bread, you'd likely treat it with the reverence usually reserved for a visiting deity, or at least a very important, high-ranking government official with the power to increase your rations. Beekeeping was certainly practiced in ancient Egypt from very early periods, with honey being highly prized not only for its intense, incomparable sweetness but also for its perceived medicinal properties, its use as a preservative, and its vital role in religious rituals and as offerings in temples. However, it was significantly more of a luxury item than dates or figs, requiring specialized knowledge to manage the hives and harvest the precious golden liquid. While your artisan household might occasionally acquire a small amount of honey through trade, as a special gift, or perhaps as a bonus for exceptionally good work, it's far less likely to be a daily breakfast staple compared to the more readily available and affordable fruit sweeteners. Historians still argue about the commonality and average quantity of actual honey consumption among the non-elite classes like the Deir el-Medina artisans for their daily meals, versus its probable reservation for medicinal applications. It was a key ingredient in many ancient Egyptian remedies for important religious offerings to ensure the favor of the gods, or as a special sweetener for festival foods, cakes, and the more elaborate cuisine enjoyed by the wealthy and the royal court. If, by some stroke of particularly good fortune, a little pot of honey is indeed present in your home, it might be drizzled ever so sparingly over a piece of your warm bread. It's golden, viscous anointing instantly transforming the humble loaf into a moment of pure, decadent delight. The aroma alone, richly floral and intoxicatingly sweet, would be enough to make the entire morning feel exceptionally special and blessed. Other, less common sources of sweetness might theoretically include carob pods, whose tough exterior hides a naturally sweet and chewy pulp when gnawed upon, or perhaps even the sweet, tender stalks of certain varieties of papyrus or other riverside reeds. though these were likely more opportunistic snacks than regular breakfast components, but for reliable, everyday sweetness. Dates and figs are your most steadfast and cherished allies in the daily quest for a balanced and energizing start to your day. As these sweet, natural offerings are added to the growing assembly of your breakfast items, the simple meal begins to feel truly complete and wonderfully rounded. The warm, fragrant loaves of freshly baked bread, their crusts perhaps still issuing the faintest of comforting crackles as they settle, now sit as the undeniable centerpiece of your morning's rapidly assembling meal. Alongside them, the small, vibrant pile of sharply scented onions and crisp, earthy radishes offers a pungent counterpoint, and the sweet, chewy dates or soft figs promise a delightful finishing touch of natural energy. The solid components are all present, a testament to careful preparation in the reliable bounty of the cultivated land. But no ancient Egyptian meal, especially one intended to fuel a long and often arduous day of skilled labor, would be considered truly complete or properly balanced without its accompanying and equally essential liquid component. And that beverage, far more often than not, chosen for its nourishment, its safety, and its deep cultural resonance, is beer. And now, for the piece de resistance of any self-respecting ancient Egyptian breakfast, the beer. Though, let's be clear, if you're picturing a frosty, hop-forward pint of craft IPA, or even a light, fizzy lager, you might need to adjust your historical goggles quite significantly. This is more like a robust, slightly fizzy, and entirely wholesome bread shake. Egyptian beer, known in the ancient tongue as hanket or hanket, and later referred to by Greek writers as zythum, was an absolute cornerstone of the diet for people of all ages, genders, and social classes. From the highest echelons of the royal court down to the humblest village farmer. For daily consumption, particularly for a morning meal, it was typically less an intoxicant designed for merriment and more thick, nutritious, and somewhat soupy liquid food. It often resembled a thin porridge or a hearty gruel in consistency, and it was usually murky and unfiltered, containing beneficial yeasts and sediments. Its alcohol content, especially for the everyday brew, was generally quite low, but it was remarkably rich in carbohydrates, essential proteins, valuable B vitamins, and various amino acids, all derived from the grains from which it was made. It was, in essence, liquid bread, and just as vital, if not more so, for daily sustenance and hydration. The brewing process itself is a delicate art, passed down through generations, usually within the female domain of the household. It involves coaxing greatness from what seems like fairly simple ingredients, primarily crumbled bread and water, a bit like a very patient and ultimately quite rewarding science experiment that you can eventually, and thankfully, drink. The preparation of this daily beer might already be underway in a designated brewing corner of your home. Or perhaps a batch made the previous day or two is now perfectly conditioned and ready for consumption. The process, typically handled by your wife or another skilled woman in the household as an integral part of her domestic duties, often started with the creation of specially prepared beer bread. These were loaves, usually made from barley or sometimes emmer wheat, that were only lightly baked, just enough to dry them out and develop some flavor, but not so much as to kill off the wild yeast naturally present on the grain husks or to destroy the enzymes necessary for fermentation. These crumbly, underbaked loaves would then be broken into small pieces and soaked in water in a large pottery vessel, often one specifically designated for brewing. Sometimes malted grain, that is. Grain that has been allowed to sprout and then carefully dried would be added to the mash. The sprouting process activates enzymes that are crucial for converting the starches in the grain into fermentable sugars, the essential food for the yeast. This mixture of crumbled bread, malted grain, if used, and water would then be left to soak and ferment for a period, typically a day or two for the standard household brew. The natural yeast present on the grain and in the surrounding environment perhaps even residing within the pores of the well-used fermentation jar itself, would get to work, diligently consuming the sugars and producing a small amount of alcohol and the characteristic carbon dioxide that gave the beer a slight, pleasant effervescence. To ensure a consistent and quicker fermentation, a portion of a previous successful brew, already active and teeming with a healthy yeast culture, might be added as a starter. Much like a sourdough starter is used in bread making, this practice helped to maintain a consistent house flavor and reduce the risk of spoilage by less desirable microorganisms. The resulting liquid wouldn't be the clear, sparkling, golden beverage that the word beer conjures in many modern minds. Instead, ancient Egyptian daily beer would typically be opaque, ranging in color from a light, creamy tan to a murky, earthy brown, often with fine particles of grain and yeast still visibly suspended within it. While it might be strained through a piece of clean linen cloth or a fine sieve woven from reeds or horsehair to remove the coarsest bits of husk, chaff, and undissolved sediment, much of the solid matter deliberately remained, contributing significantly to its considerable nutritional value and its thick, satisfying texture. The aroma, too, would be quite different from modern brews. Instead of the bright, bitter notes of hops, which were not used in ancient Egyptian brewing, it would carry a distinctly yeasty, slightly sour, and somewhat bready fragrance, with an underlying sweetness from the grain. A far cry from today's pilsners or stouts, but a familiar and comforting smell to you. This liquid bread was so essential, so ubiquitous, it was practically a food group in itself. Toddlers probably had it in their sippy cups. Well, their unglazed clay equivalent, anyway, perhaps diluted further with water. It's the original all-in-one nutritional beverage, enjoyed long before those fancy, pre-packaged meal replacement shakes ever hit the market. It was often considered safer to drink than plain water drawn from canals or even some wells, as the water quality could be variable and potentially carry disease-causing organisms. The fermentation process, even producing only a small amount of alcohol, would have helped to kill off some of these harmful bacteria, making the beer a more hygienic option for daily hydration. The provision of daily beer rations for workers, alongside bread and oil, was a well-established mainstream historical fact in ancient Egypt. Laborers on monumental state construction projects, such as the pyramids at Giza or the very royal tombs that you, as an artisan, helped to create in the Theban necropolis, received a significant portion of their wages in this tangible, drinkable form, ensuring they had the necessary caloric intake and hydration to perform their strenuous and highly skilled tasks. The cultural significance of beer in ancient Egypt was immense, extending far beyond its role as mere daily sustenance. It wasn't just a drink, it was a symbol of life, nourishment, joy, and even transformation. It's a quirky tidbit that the Egyptians even had a specific goddess of beer named Tenenet, who was also associated with brewing, bakers, and, interestingly, childbirth, highlighting the deep cultural connections between fermentation, nourishment, and the very processes of life. Beer was also a common and important offering made to the gods in temples and at household shrines, and it was drunk, sometimes in very generous quantities if ancient texts and depictions are to be believed, at religious festivals and celebrations. So, as you anticipate your morning cup, you are preparing to partake in a tradition that is deeply woven into the very fabric of Egyptian life, from the most mundane daily routines to the most sacred religious rites. Historians still argue about the precise range of typical alcohol by volume ABV in the daily beer consumed by commoners throughout ancient Egyptian history. Was it consistently very low? Perhaps only around 1% to 2%, making it akin to a mildly fermented liquid food with minimal intoxicating effect? Or could it sometimes reach levels comparable to modern light beers, say 3% to 4%, providing a mild euphoric or relaxing effect even in everyday household settings? Stronger, specially brewed beers, sometimes flavored with dates, honey, mandarin, for various herbs for added potency or particular flavors, were certainly known and were likely reserved for banquets, festivals, or specific ritual purposes. For your breakfast, however, the beer would almost certainly be of the weaker, more nutritious variety, intended primarily for sustenance, hydration, and energy rather than for significant inebriation. Your wife now carefully ladles this thick, soupy, life-giving beer from its large fermentation jar into smaller, individual pottery cups or simple bowls for each member of the family. The sight of it, murky and unassuming as it might appear to an outsider, is a familiar and deeply welcome part of your morning ritual, a promise of satisfaction and strength for the hours ahead. The thick, nourishing, and slightly tangy beer has now been carefully ladled from its larger fermentation jar into individual, rough-hewn pottery cups or simple, wide-mouthed bowls, one for each member of your gathered household. Its yeasty, somewhat sour aroma now joins the chorus of other scents: the warm, inviting perfume of the freshly baked bread, the sharp, clean fragrance of the washed and prepared onions and radishes, and the underlying sweet promise of the dates or figs that await. All the distinct components of your morning meal, each one the result of considerable forethought and diligent labor, are, at long last, fully prepared and ready for consumption. The fire on the hearth, its primary duty of baking now complete, has likely burned down to a bed of cheerfully glowing embers, still providing a gentle, comforting warmth and a soft, flickering light that dances on the interior walls of your home. The next, and perhaps most anticipated, step is to prepare the specific space where your family will gather together to partake in this humble, yet vital, repast. It's time to set the table, which in your ancient world involves considerably less complex origami with starched linen napkins and intricate silver cutlery, and more along the lines of making absolutely sure the family goat, if you have one, hasn't somehow wandered in and mistaken the designated breakfast mat for a particularly tasty new form of roughage. If you and your family typically unroll your individual sleeping mats in the main living area each night, these would have already been neatly rolled up and stowed away, perhaps in a designated corner or against a wall, thus freeing up the central portion of the room. Your wife, or perhaps one of the older children, might then take a simple broom, likely a rough bundle of stiff twigs, dried grasses, or perhaps durable palm fibers securely bound together, and give the packed earth floor a quick, efficient sweep. This isn't about achieving a sterile, dust-free environment, an almost impossible task in a land where fine desert sand is an ever-present and pervasive companion, but rather about creating a reasonably clean, pleasant, and orderly space for the communal act of eating. There's an inherent sense of respect, a simple ritual, however small and unacknowledged, that often accompanies the sharing of food, even in the most modest of settings. In many common Egyptian households, such as yours, the dining table as a separate piece of furniture simply doesn't exist for daily meals. The designated eating area is often this freshly swept patch of the cool earthen floor itself. Alternatively, and offering a slight degree of additional comfort and demarcation, a larger, clean reed mat, perhaps one specifically reserved for mealtimes, might be carefully unfurled in the chosen spot. These mats, skillfully woven from pliable Nile reeds or the broad, tough leaves of the palm tree, provide a slightly more defined and marginally softer eating surface. They are eminently practical, easily cleaned by simply taking them outside and shaking them vigorously, and can be conveniently rolled up and stored away when the meal is concluded. It's a mainstream historical fact that ancient Egyptian commoners, including skilled artisans like yourself, typically ate their meals seated directly on the floor or upon such mats, using their hands as their primary utensils. Raised tables, while certainly known and depicted in some contexts, were generally reserved for the wealthier echelons of society for their more elaborate banquets, or they served as smaller, often ornate, Offering stands for presenting gifts of food and drink to the gods in temples or domestic shrines, rather than being used for everyday family dining by ordinary folk. Once the eating area itself is prepared to satisfaction, the tableware, such as it is brought out and arranged. This consists primarily of simple, functional, and locally made pottery, sturdy enough to withstand daily use. There's no concept here of a best china reserved for special guests. Every piece is utilitarian. The still warm bread might be piled invitingly on a large, shallow pottery platter or directly onto the center of the clean mat, easily accessible to everyone. The prepared vegetables, the crisp, pungent onions and radishes, along with any other greens, might be arranged artfully alongside the bread or placed in their own smaller communal bowl. The dates or figs, your small but welcome portion of natural sweetness, would also be positioned within easy reach. Everyone gathers round, finding their designated patch of floor space. No need to worry about who gets the coveted seat with the slightly wobbly leg that makes an annoying squeaking sound, because all legs are firmly and democratically planted on the ground. It's very egalitarian, this ancient tradition of floor-based dining. Each family member will already have, or will now be given, their own pottery cup or small, handleless bowl containing their share of the thick, nutritious beer. Historians still argue about the precise degree of formality and specific table etiquette that might have been observed during everyday family meals in these artisan households were there. For example, strict, unspoken rules about who was entitled to eat first. Perhaps the father as head of the household, or an elder, or how the communal food was to be shared amongst family members. Or was it a more relaxed, fluid, and intuitive process, dictated largely by age, individual appetite, and the immediate availability of each component of the meal? The specific social choreography of these simple repasts remains a subtle area of ongoing research. The spread is laid out, a humble feast for the senses, or at least for a very hungry artisan family about to face a demanding day. It's not exactly a meticulously curated 10-course tasting menu from a Michelin-starred establishment, but it's got all the essential ancient Egyptian food groups well represented. Bread, things that aren't bread but go well with it, and of course, the slightly fermented bread juice. The visual appeal of this simple meal is undeniable in its rustic honesty, the very golden brown hues of the bread crusts, the vibrant whites and greens of the onions, the cheerful reds or pure whites of the radishes, the rich, dark tones of the dates, and the murky, opaque beige of the beer in its earthenware cups. The light from the gently pulsing embers of the hearth, combined with the steadily increasing ambient daylight now filtering more strongly through the doorway or any small wall vents, illuminates the scene with a soft, inviting glow, highlighting the textures of the food and the familiar faces of your gathered family. The combined aromas of all the freshly prepared food now reach their peak concentration, a complex and deeply appetizing bouquet that fills your small home. The warm, almost sweet perfume of the baked bread, the sharp, unapologetic pungency of the cut onions, the subtle, sugary fragrance of the dates, and the distinctly yeasty, slightly sour tang of the beer. These are the smells of home, of nourishment, of a day beginning with promise. The soft sounds of the family settling into their accustomed places around the mat. The occasional quiet clink of a pottery cup being adjusted on the slightly uneven floor, the last few gentle crackles from the dying hearth, all contribute to an atmosphere of communal anticipation. A shared moment of pause and togetherness before the day's labors and individual responsibilities fully scatter the family members to their respective tasks. It's a quirky tidbit that in some lavish tomb depictions of banquets enjoyed by the wealthy elite, guests are shown being offered elegant cones of perfumed animal fat or scented wax to place upon their heads. As the banquet progressed in the warm air, these cones would gradually melt, releasing their expensive fragrance and anointing the hair and shoulders of the guest. Your humble breakfast setting, thankfully, is far removed from such potentially messy and overtly scented extravaganzas, focusing instead purely on the honest, unadorned requirements of sustenance and shared experience. The stage is now perfectly set for the first, and perhaps most satisfying, meal of the day. The moment has arrived. Around the simple, shared meal spread out on the reed mat, your family is gathered. The anticipation, almost a tangible presence in the warm, fragrant air of your home. The soft light from the glowing embers of the hearth, mingled now with the stronger, clearer light of the approaching dawn filtering through the doorway, illuminates the scene with a gentle glow. Perhaps a brief, unspoken acknowledgement passes between you and your wife. A silent recognition of the sustenance before you, or maybe the children, their eyes bright with hunger and the simple joy of the morning, simply await a parental cue. There's no elaborate formal grace, no lengthy invocation, just a quiet, shared understanding that it is time to eat. You reach out your hand, calloused and strong from the daily wielding of mallet and chisel, deftly tearing a piece from one of the warm, golden brown loaves of bread. The crust offers a slight, satisfying resistance before yielding to the softer, slightly chewy interior. You take the first bite. Ah, bread. The ancient world's remarkably versatile answer to the perennial question of what's for breakfast, lunch, and probably dinner too. It's wonderfully versatile, it's dependable at filling, and it conveniently doubles as an edible spoon or pusher for other morsels. Multifunctional culinary genius, really. The taste is honest and straightforward. The nutty, slightly earthy flavor of the emmer wheat, perhaps a hint of sweetness from the grain itself, the subtle tang if it was leavened with a sour starter, and the satisfying texture that requires a good, healthy chew. Others in your family follow suit, hands reaching for the communal platter of bread, each person tearing off a portion. Pieces of bread might then be used to accompany a bite of crisp, pungent radish, or a sliver of sharp green onion. As you chew on a particularly feisty spring onion, its vibrant, almost aggressive flavor cutting cleanly through the milder taste of the bread. You might feel its invigorating power course through you. That's not just an onion you're eating. That's raw, unadulterated determination in vegetable form, practically guaranteed to keep any overly chatty-tuned spirits or, more prosaically, sleepy afternoon slumps at a respectful distance later in your demanding workday. The children might initially favor the bread, perhaps with a coveted dried date or a piece of soft fig, their smaller hands navigating the simple feast with an inherited dexterity. You take a long, satisfying draught of the thick, cool beer from your pottery cup. Its tangy, slightly sour, and faintly sweet flavor is a familiar and welcome counterpoint to the solids. Washing down the bread and vegetables, its soupy consistency almost a food in itself. It's refreshing, despite its lack of modern, ice-cold crispness. And you can almost feel its B vitamins and carbohydrates beginning to replenish your system, a liquid fuel for the hours ahead. The sounds of eating are muted and companionable. The soft tearing of bread, the quiet, focused chewing, the occasional appreciative murmur or sigh, the gentle clink of a pottery cup set back down on the mat. As you eat, your thoughts might naturally turn, as they often do, towards the purpose of this nourishment. This humble fare, bread made from grain you might have received as part of your state-allocated rations. Vegetables perhaps from a small household plot or bartered from a neighbor, fruit from the ever-generous date palm, and the ubiquitous, life-sustaining beer is the very fuel for your skilled labor. The diet of the Deir el Medina artisans, a well-documented mainstream historical fact, while simple by elite standards, was generally more substantial and reliable than that of many other laboring classes in ancient Egypt. The state, the pharaoh's administration, recognized that your highly specialized skills as a tomb builder, a sculptor, a painter, a draftsman, a quarryman, were crucial for the successful creation of their eternal resting places, and thus provided regular allocations of grain, beer, fish, oil, and other necessities to ensure you and your colleagues remain fit, capable, and, for the most part, contented. You reflect on how the sustained energy from this bread will power your arms as you meticulously chip away at limestone, carving intricate hieroglyphs that will speak for eternity. You consider how the hydration and micronutrients from the beer and vegetables will help maintain your focus and stamina during the long hours spent in the often dim, sometimes cramped, and always dusty confines of a royal tomb. The quick sugars from the dates will provide an immediate lift, helping you to face the walk over the pass to the Valley of the Kings. It's a direct, uncomplicated equation. This food equals the strength and clarity needed to transform raw rock and simple pigments into breathtaking art that will defy millennia. This understanding brings a quiet sense of gratitude, not just for the food itself, but for your wife's labor in its preparation and for the system, imperfect as it sometimes might be, that provides it. It's a quirky tidbit that the workers of Deir el Medina were not always passively content with their lot. Ostraca, inscribed shards of pottery or flakes of limestone, have been discovered detailing complaints and even organized strikes or work stoppages when these vital rations were delayed or deemed insufficient. These are some of the earliest recorded instances of labor disputes in human history, a testament to the workers' awareness of their value and their right to fair provision. Your satisfaction with this particular breakfast, therefore, is partly underwritten by this long history of asserted entitlements. The meal concludes not with a feeling of heavy overfullness, but with a pleasant sense of satiation, a comfortable warmth in your belly, and a noticeable rise in your energy levels. The lingering taste of pungent onion, sweet date, and earthy bread are a satisfying reminder of the nourishment received. It's amazing what a bit of well-made bread, some hearty beer, and the strategic deployment of onion power can actually do for one's outlook on a long day of carving symbols of eternal life for a pharaoh you'll likely never meet. Any leftover scraps of bread, if there are any with growing children around, will be carefully saved for a later snack. Waste is a concept ill-afforded. The simple pottery cups and bowls will be given a quick rinse with a little of the remaining water, ready for their next use. Historians still argue about the exact caloric values and overall nutritional completeness of the average daily rations provided to the Deir el Medina workers over the many centuries of its occupation, and whether these provisions, even when delivered in full, consistently and adequately met the high energy demands of their often strenuous, dust-filled, and meticulously detailed labor, especially during periods of known administrative disruption, famine in the wider land, or unusually intense construction schedules. For this morning, however, your meal has been sufficient, a solid foundation. The sun is now making its presence more keenly felt, its light stronger, its warmth more assertive. The sounds from the village outside have grown in volume and complexity. The day is well and truly underway for everyone. You have eaten, you have shared time with your family, and you are fueled. The next and final stage of your morning routine before departing for the necropolis, gathering your tools, and preparing your mind for the skilled work ahead, now awaits. This breakfast, this taste of toil's fuel, has prepared you for it. And so, as our artisan feels the simple, wholesome energy of his breakfast begin to course through him, readying him for the skilled and sacred work that fills his days, our own journey alongside him this morning gently winds towards its close. The vivid sights and sounds, the unique tastes and textures of that ancient Egyptian dawn begin to soften, to recede into the quiet mists of time, much like the last vestiges of your own sleep are now melting away. Let the image of the sun rising over the Theban hills, a daily promise of warmth and light, become a comforting glow in your mind. Allow the rhythmic, earthy sounds of that distant village, the grinding of grain, the murmur of awakening families, the distant call of a desert bird, to transform into the gentle, soothing hum that eases you further into your own peaceful rest. The artisan carried the strength of his bread and beer into a day of creating enduring beauty. May you carry the tranquility of this shared story into a night of deep and restorative dreams. The chapter of his morning is now complete, and your own need for slumber calls. Let the peace of that ancient, simpler time settle over you like the cool, silken desert night. Rest now, drift easily, and know that all is well. Sleep deeply. Sweet dreams.